Good afternoon or evening or morning. I have no idea what time you're watching this at. We're looking at who is God as one of the modules for the Bible College. As part of it, we're going to do this week 10, online, so that people can get access to it without having to be here in church. I'm currently standing in an empty church. To help you get through the module and to know what you're doing, you should have a set of notes like this. These should, if you have them through email or if you've got them through another form, then you should have those. You should also have the PowerPoints. I'll have delivered them so that you'll have access to them too. And we're going to think about how big is our God. It sounds an easy question, he's big, but there's more to it than that. How do we explain how big our God is? If you think back to Old Testament times, they would argue over whose God was God and whose God was biggest. You see, they would define it by who won the war. If Baal's people beat Israel's people, then Baal is a bigger God than Yahweh. And they would use these definitions to try and argue their point. My God is bigger than your God because my God let me beat you. It doesn't always work that way. I mean, in general, if I take on somebody who's much bigger than me, it doesn't matter who's on my side. I'm just being stupid, and those sorts of risks don't work out. So the question really is, how do we explain how big our God is? What we're going to do is think through some verses that explain that God is big. But before we do that, I just want to get to you the concept of what God is like. If God is so big, he has no rival. So big that everything is created and doesn't add up to a challenge to him. So we're going to think about that. We're going to think about how we imagine God as big and how we explain that. Then we're going to look at how the God who is that big uses grace and shows grace and remains big. And then in section 2, we're going to record a second video. In section 2, we'll look at how we respond to a God that's big. So let's start with some Bible verses. I wonder if you said, how big is your God? What verses you would go to? I would start with a few different ones. Let's start with 1 Kings. 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 27. 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 27. Here's what it says there. I should have opened it, shouldn't I? But will God really dwell on earth? They're making the temple and Solomon's making the temple, and he's saying, is God going to dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain you. How much less this temple that I have built? Even heaven cannot contain God. How big is your God? Bigger than even the heavens and the earth, bigger than the universe. But is that enough? Is that enough? Well, what does that mean? What difference does it make that God is big? Well, how do we understand that in relation to us? Well, maybe if we look at Jeremiah, that would be helpful to you as well. Jeremiah 23, verses 23 and 24. Am I only a God nearby, declares the Lord, and not a God far away? Who can hide in secret places so that I cannot see them, declares the Lord? Do not I fill heaven and earth, declares the Lord. God is so big and he fills heaven and earth, and that means there's nothing beyond his notice. That means there's nothing beyond his care. That means there's nothing that he is not responsible for and Lord over. So as we look at it there, we're thinking, right, okay, God is big, yeah. But it means that if God is big, he sees everything, he knows everything, he's in charge of everything. And that's not it. There's more. Ephesians 3:20 is one that some of you might be familiar with. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all you could ask or imagine. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all you could ask or imagine. God is able to do not just more than you can ask or more than you can imagine, or much more, but immeasurably more than all you could ask or imagine. That's how big he is. Think about that. If you can imagine God, he's bigger than that. How big is your God? Well, however big your imagination of your God is, he's actually bigger than that. God is beyond limits. He will not be put in a box. I guess some of us have tried that before, right? We say to God, well, I'll do anything you want except that. And you just do that and I'll do this. And God usually proves his point that he doesn't do what he's told. He is the Lord. And he sees all and he knows all. He's in all and he proves all. He is bigger than all. And everything is contained by him. If we go through some other verses, he created all things. It says in Genesis 1 verse 1, all things were created by him and for him. God, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Sorry, I'm jumping to Colossians 1. All things were made for him. In Deuteronomy, it tells us that he owns all things. Deuteronomy 10:14 tells us that he owns all things. Hebrews 1 verse 3 says that he sustains all things with his powerful word. He just speaks and it's sustained. Let's think about what it's like then. If God doesn't sustain things, does he just end them? To end you, does God need to decide, I'm going to end your life? Or does he just stop sustaining you? He sustains all things. That's our God. He's that big that if he stops sustaining you, you have no existence, you have no meaning, you have no life. It's only the breath that he breathed into you that is life. So God is all life. God created all things. He's over all things. He's above all things. He sustains all things. And they were all made for him. And he says in Isaiah 55, my ways are not your ways and my thoughts are not your thoughts. My thoughts are higher than your thoughts and my ways are higher than your ways. God's way is not to do it the way we would do it. God is bigger than that. That's why when we come to things that we don't understand, that come to things that we struggle with, God says, I have no issue. God is not surprised by coronavirus, by sickness, by a car crash. God is not surprised by people sinning. Oh no, he sinned. I don't know what I'll do about that. God knows exactly what he's doing. He knew from the beginning. It's nothing has changed. These things are God's. All things are God's. How big is God? Bigger than all the things that we could imagine God being. Bigger than big. Bigger than infinite and eternal. There was nothing before him. There's nothing after him. There's nothing above him or behind him or beyond him. And God is in control. That's how big he is. Now, one of the issues that we have when we're discussing how big God is that sometimes things don't go the way we planned. That's where we come into a bit of a brush with how big God is. Well, if God was big, surely he would sort this, or surely he would fix that, or surely it wouldn't be an issue for him. Well, technically it's not an issue for him, but his ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. His plans are not our plans. Our plans focus very much on what is temporary. If God was God, then surely he would fix this temporary problem that I have, this situation which I can't fix. But this situation that you can't fix is temporary, and God is eternal. He's thinking about bigger things. His plans are bigger plans. As we worry about the life of me and my family and my friends, God is worrying about the lives of 8 billion people in the world. 8 billion people. It's not small. It's not insignificant. None of our prayers are, none of our thoughts are. But God's ways are not our ways. And God's thoughts are not our thoughts. This is where we struggle because we say, well, our God is really big, but then he doesn't do what he wants. He's big and he loves me, right? He's big and he loves me. I know that. And yet everything doesn't always go the way I want it to go. Does that mean God is not big enough or doesn't love me enough? Actually, the answer is neither of those. God is big enough and he loves you enough. But there's more going on than just you getting what you want. One of the biggest things you see is that pain was designed by God. When man sinned, God gave us pain. He made it hard work. He made childbirth painful. He turned to man and said, you can't continue the way you're going. And he cursed the world. And the world has been cursed ever since. And man's sin increases the curse. The curse is that sin is not okay. And the curse says something needs to be done about it. I use the traditional picture. You stick your hand in the fire, it hurts. If it doesn't hurt, you don't take your hand out of the fire. And yet we complain that it hurts, it hurts, it hurts. Well, don't put your hand in the fire. Don't offend God. Don't oppose God. Don't go against God. And when things are painful and strugglesome, remember his thoughts aren't just for this world or for this time. He's eternal. He's thinking bigger. He's got a bigger plan. So when we're saying God is big, we're not denying that he cares. We're just saying that his plans are different than our plans. And in actual fact, his love and his compassion increases and is evidence of how big he is. I want you to think about the devil for a second. You see, a lot of people think that God and the devil are rivals. Do you think so? I just paused there for a moment. It was good, wasn't it? Do you think that God and the devil are rivals? Who created who? God created the devil. God created the devil knowing that he would sin, knowing that he would turn against him. And God used that to give man a choice. You can do whatever you want. Just don't listen to that voice. There's one thing you're not to do, and man chooses to do it. Do you think that God and the devil are rivals? In the end, there is no rivalry. If we read in Revelation, the story of what happens at the end, that Jesus leads his army out, and then all his enemies die by the sword that comes out of his mouth. His armies do nothing. 200 million cavalry it talks about in Revelation 6. And yet Jesus just speaks and they die. That's it. There is no rivalry. There is God. And there's gods. Everything that belongs to God. God is not somebody who is worried about rivals. In fact, if the devil is in any way a rival, it's because God created him to be. You see, in creating the opportunity to sin, God creates the opportunity to be forgiven and to love and to be thankful. So God, in his massive grace, wants to show the world, and it tells us in Ephesians 3:10 that he wants to show the world through the church how wise and gracious he is. He wants to show through normal people that he is big and wise and good. But to show that he's good, he needs something that is not to compare to. To show grace, he needs somebody that needs forgiven. God created the opportunity for sin so that we could be forgiven. And we could come into a different relationship. And God could show his grace, his love, his joy to the universe. It takes real strength and confidence to create rivalry, to allow a rival, and to allow sin, and to allow failure. God did not make a mistake. It didn't come to him as a surprise when man sinned. But he knew what he was going to do about it. He had a plan for it. So God is so big that he created things so that his grace could be shown. Grace takes being the bigger man, and God is the bigger one. He is bigger than all of it. By his grace, he can forgive anything. And so he allows us to fail. He allows us to oppose him. He allows us to be enemies so that he can show who he is. He's not afraid. God is not afraid of sin or sickness or sadness or death. Life and death were created by him. Death is meant so that this life won't just keep going and it won't be a mess all the way through. After death, we're set free. After death, there's joy and life everlasting for those who are in Christ. We were meant to not live this life forever. And yet God, in his huge grace, how big he is, he chose to let us fail, to let us fall apart, and to let some continue to do that, to continue and increasingly oppose him. He's not threatened by them. He's so big. His grace can forgive anyone. I wonder if we sort of think through that. How big is God? Big enough to allow you to oppose him and not be threatened. Big enough to allow you to fail and to have a way to forgive you. Big enough that there's nothing in this universe, even the broken stuff, which opposes him really. It means nothing. The plan is already in place. Revelations is full of it. The devil loses and he's thrown into the lake of fire. And he's no longer a rival to God, if he ever was. All that is created is held in the palms of his hands. It's no threat to him. Our whole galaxy is a speck of dust in the palm of his hands. And yet, in that speck of dust, there's 100 billion stars. And round one of those stars are 8, maybe 9, we're not sure, planets. And on one of those planets, 8 billion of these similar types of creatures live. And you're one of them. God is so big, and yet he's interested in you. He created all things. He owns all things. He sustains all things. He is big enough to allow grace, to allow failure, to show grace when we turn against him, and to not be afraid of opposition. That's actually why he created our universe. He didn't need to create a world that was temporary. Everything that was eternal was good, and yet he created this temporary stuff so that he could show how big he is and how gracious he is. There is nothing that opposes him or is a threat to him. How big is your God? You know what? We go back to some of those wars in the Old Testament when they're saying our God is bigger than your God because we defeated you. And yet God said, well, I'm just using you to turn my people back. Your God is not even a threat to me. It's not like there is a rival. It's not like Baal was ever a threat to God. And God was like, oh no, what if they listen to Baal? He's not concerned. He's actually using those people to try and get Israel to turn back, to repent. That's always been God's plan, to draw us back, to bring us back, to redeem and restore. So how big is our God? Let's summarize how big our God is. There is no imagining how big he is. He is immeasurably more than all we can ask or imagine. How big is he? Well, everything is his. Everything is sustained by him. Everything is owned by him. Everything was made by him. Even his enemies, even those who oppose him. How big is God? Big enough to show grace, to not fear what's in the world, to not be challenged by it. How big is God? There is no word. Even infinite is too small. to define how big our God is. When we come back, we're going to look at our response to a big God. How do you respond to a big God? You pause and ask yourself that question before you look at the next video. How do we respond to a God that is eternally big? Do we just curl up in fear? Do we hide, like it says in Jeremiah? Is there anywhere to hide? What do we do? How do we respond to a big God? I'll give you a few minutes.